Automated Podcast.
Welcome to Automated. I'm your host, Mark Verbenkov, and in this weekly podcast, we will be exploring the impact of emerging technology on jobs, society, as well as us, with business and technology leaders, researchers, and independent professionals across the world. So on the podcast, I've been fortunate, I think, to bring on really excellent guests to talk about some exciting technologies that will, of course, both impact and automate jobs in different industries. However, one of the technologies that I've had kind of the most requests for is artificial intelligence. And I think with really good reason, as it has been getting significant media attention for the past several years. So today's episode will specifically look at artificial intelligence, or AI, and perhaps more importantly, also look at the differences between how AI is being developed and implemented in Europe as compared to, say, China or the US. So my guest today is Philipp Slusallek. He is the scientific director and member of the executive board at the German Research Center for Artificial Intelligence, also known as DFKI, where he heads the research area on agents and simulated reality. So if you have ever been interested in hearing more about what the state of AI is in Europe, how AI will of course impact jobs, and what the challenges are for the future of European AI development, then this episode is for you. So a little bit more about Philipp. He originally studied physics, got a PhD in computer science, became a visiting assistant professor at Stanford University, and since 1999 holds the chair for computer graphics at Saarland University in Germany. Since 2008, he is also a scientific director at the DFKI, the largest independent center worldwide in AI, where they combine graphics and simulation with AI and high-performance computing with the goal to develop something called trusted AI, which you'll hear about more in the episode. But basically, they are AI systems where guarantees about their behavior can really be provided. And finally, he's also the co-founder of CLAIRE, which is the world's largest AI association, bringing together the European AI community to achieve excellence across all of AI for all of Europe and beyond, with a human-centered focus. Hey there, Philipp. Thanks for coming on to the Automated Podcast today.
Hello, I'm excited to be here. That's an interesting new format that actually I haven't done before in this form.
Great. Well, I'm happy to be the first podcast for you to come on to. I've been looking forward to this discussion because, as I mentioned before we started recording, I haven't had too many guests talk specifically about artificial intelligence on the podcast, and I think as it's one of the most highly discussed technologies out there, it's great to have your expertise and your insights being shared on the podcast today. So I really appreciate it. One of the ways that I like to start the podcast with all guests is asking a little bit more of your kind of personal interests. So if you can share what initially got you interested in artificial intelligence, maybe some interesting anecdote or something to kind of give the audience a little bit of a more human perspective as to why you got into the technology that you're working with.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting story, I think, at least from my perspective. In school already, I was interested in computer science and math and physics. And when it was about to study, I wanted to do something real. And I actually decided to go into physics. I finished my master in physics. But already at the end of the studies, I actually went to computer science, but not into AI, but into actually graphics, computer graphics, exciting area. And that's actually also where I'm coming from. And since '99, I'm actually professor for computer graphics here at Saarland University. Saarland is right on the in Germany, right on the French border near Luxembourg. And we do a lot of realistic rendering of 3D scenes, of 3D environments, like in games and things like that, highly interactive. And in 2008, I was asked whether I would join the German Research Center for Artificial Intelligence, because there is a lot of connection between AI and 3D environments. Specifically, you might actually want to train AI agents in virtual environments. And I've always done a lot of projects with industry. So for instance, we have developed real-time ray tracing here, or at least made major contributions to that. That's more on the graphics side now. that actually got my ex PhD students who work now at Intel just in February got a technical Oscar, a technical achievement award from the film industry for that work. So it's really something that's being used in the industry, and we are applying this now in the context of AI, and maybe we can talk about a little bit more about that later.
Yeah,
it's an exciting connection, and so from that background, I have maybe a different perspective on AI than people who have grown up in AI. Maybe.
Right. Yeah, coming at it from a unique perspective, one could say. Yeah. So one of the things I think that I was really interested in hearing your perspective on was kind of the differences between the AI development in Europe versus the two other kind of main actors, China and the US. I myself is from Canada, and I'm always bombarded by either messages from friends or just media in general about the kind of state of AI in the US. But obviously, you're a European professional, so maybe we could talk a little bit about how European AI development is maybe a little bit different from United States and China.
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, of course, there is excellent researchers in all of those areas, typically at universities. But I think it's fair to say that AI in the US and in China is much more driven by the big corporations, whether that's Google, Amazon, and Baidu, and you name them. They hire some of the best people. They have large research groups. Yeah, so that is the structure there. We don't really have those big companies in Europe, so it's much more driven by public funding for AI research. And in the past, the AI community in Europe has been highly fragmented. Right? There was excellent labs all over the place, but there wasn't any or very little interaction between them, and so there wasn't really a European AI identity or even a common theme. And that has actually changed. And one of the reasons, and we have been part of that, is actually we founded the CLAIRE community, the CLAIRE initiative, which is a grassroots initiative to bring together the European AI labs. And CLAIRE now has 400 labs all over Europe as members, and we were funded through big projects at the from the European Union, and we're trying to influence and also to some degree coordinate and bring together and extract what are the key European topics, right? I think every one of those areas of AI has to have, we have to identify what is the European way of AI. And I think that will be very much driven by values. This idea of trustworthy AI has been formulated as a main goal by the European Commission. We're driving forward a big initiative towards what we call trusted AI, providing guarantees for AI systems. So there's a lot of stuff coming together. It could always go faster, I think.
Sure.
But I'm very happy with how things are developing. There is a big problem in holding talent here in Europe. Google is paying pretty good salaries, and others too. I mean, that's the interesting thing. If you look at papers and some of the big systems have been developed in the US, less so in China, there's actually lots of European AI trained people, European trained AI researchers and engineers who actually are working on those systems. So to some degree, there's a lot of European AI also in the American AI systems in there. But of course, that is diminishing what we can do here in Europe. So there we want to really encourage people to stay here in Europe. And they're in particular, one of the big ideas from CLAIRE when we founded Claire, that's actually 3 years ago, is actually this idea of beyond just the network of all of these AI labs, and having some centers of excellence across Europe that's being created. Those are being created now. We have this idea of creating what we call a CERN for AI. You know, CERN as the Center for Particle Physics. So this is where, like, every physicist working in that area wants to be. This is where things are happening. This is where the big conferences are, and where everyone wants to be. Establishing something like that here in Europe for attracting talent, attracting industry, bringing things together, and creating a lighthouse and also a trademark for European AI. This is something we're pushing forward strongly, also with the politicians at the national and the European level. So these are some of the ideas of pushing things forward here. And again, it could go faster. I think there's a lot more that can be done and can be done faster, but it's absolutely moving in the right direction. There's a lot of spirit and driving things forward here in Europe.
Right. Yeah. When you told me about this idea for the CERN for AI, I mean, for myself, as I've always wanted to go visit CERN, like, I think it's also a kind of a catchy title, right? It drives innovation. It drives motivation, I should say, towards an idea like that. One of the
Absolutely. And if I may just add to that, I mean, one has to be a little bit careful with that term, because sometimes it's a little bit misleading. There's a lot of similarity in the sense CERN is not where actually like all the physicists work there. It's this idea is where people go for a period of time to work in big experiments and big conferences and stuff like that. It's really this center where people are distributed, working from their home labs, come together. But then it's very different from AI on the other hand, right? By the way, we want to create something like that.
That was my question. If it's going to be a physical location,
it will be. Yes,
okay.
The plan is to have a physical location, because there is actually, that is one of the reasons why we want to do that. Because in Europe, a lot of the research is rather incremental, right? There's there's different groups doing a little bit of work here and there, and it's excellent work. Don't get me wrong, right? But I think the one thing that is different in the US and now to some degree also in China is this idea of this, right? Throwing the ball forward quite far and saying that's where we want to go. There's this big initiative. Like Facebook, right? They essentially want to reinvent the computer for the head-mounted displays for AR, VR. They have to redesign everything. There aren't these moonshot projects, right? That and they have a lot of value because they unite an entire group of people, European AI community, behind a common theme, a common topic. Common values also to drive that forward, and that we don't have these kinds of projects in Europe, and that's something I think that would be extremely valuable. And we have the idea, we have the feeling right now that it resonates a lot with politicians, so we're pushing this forward very much. But then just to maybe complete that. AI is different than particle physics, right? I mean, that is very fundamental research. AI is something that moves really fast, and there is a very short way from the research result that you finish today, and it might actually be used in products tomorrow, more or less. Right? That's very different from the physics. So there are important differences that we have to keep in mind when we make that. Comparisons. But as you say, yes, politicians, if you say in CERN for AI, that's something that catches on. They immediately know what we're talking about. And so, yes, that's also why we've chosen that term, of course.
Okay, great. Maybe before moving on to the, I mean, you mentioned a little bit about the specific applications of AI. I do want to touch maybe for 1 or 2 more minutes about maybe the kind of challenges that AI or that Europe is facing with regards to AI. I mean, you've mentioned a couple of times that there's this, this brain drain going to the large, rich organizations in the States. There's also maybe an idea of some of the like GDPR or other kind of regulatory issues that I've read about that might be slowing some AI development forward. Is that correct, or do you see is it mostly kind of the brain drain and maybe like not having a united vision moving the AI development forward? Is that really the problem for Europe?
I think it's much more brain drain and these big vision, this unifying ideas that bring people together. So the GDPR and regulation is actually I would think this is a success story for Europe if you think about that. Right, the GDPR was heavily fought against from the US. Right, I mean, some of the big corporations were pushing, while it was being designed, were pushing very hard against this notion of establishing something like that. When it was established, it became a worldwide success story. GDPR is being copied even in the US and many other places across the world, of course, with modifications here. And I'm also not saying that GDPR as it exists today is perfect. It certainly is not. There's certain areas that I would absolutely agree need to be revised, but that's true for any regulations. So yes, I think that is a success story. It is also a success story. Yes, it might not allow you to do certain types of research. I mean, it might not allow you to do certain types of products and stuff. Actually, there's a lot of leeway for research. There's special exceptions that you can do sandbox and you can do research in certain areas for testing purposes and so on. So there it allows a lot of that to do. But on the other hand, I think there should be limitations of what we are allowed as researchers, but also particularly if we talk about products, right? I think, and that's also, I think, more of a difference here in Europe. We have these strong European values, the human rights at the end, but a lot of that derives from that. That's very deeply ingrained in European culture. And so I think there are AI applications that might be accepted elsewhere that will not be accepted in Europe. And we should, it's really important that we as citizens are deciding on what kind of AI we want to have, right? It's a technology that we as humans are designing, right? It doesn't happen automatically. Yeah. We are designing it, and while we're designing it, we have to decide what is it that we want and what consequences will that have to the degree we can say that today. What consequences does that have on, I mean, AI is everywhere, right? And what consequences does that have on our societies? And to the degree we can change that and influence it, and there's a lot of influence we have there. We don't want to allow certain things. And you might have heard the European Commission, besides GDPR, which is about data protection, there is now since April, there is now a suggestion for a regulation of AI in Europe. Right? Yes. That is a draft at this point. This will be discussed. It will take quite some time, but it's the same idea. It's the same idea. We shouldn't be able to do everything, and we need to agree on what do we want to allow under what conditions, right? And it has a very clear agenda. I think that's very good, right? I mean, there's risky, high risk certain AI applications that are high risk, and they should be regulated more than AI applications that pose very little risk, right? There's no need to actually regulate much. So this whole idea, I think, is actually very good. And I would guess this will, to some degree, this will change the world as well, because Europe is a big market. And if we come up with regulations and a clear statement of what is it, how we want AI to work here in Europe, that will have consequences to the rest of the world. And I think that's a good thing. And in that way, I think you can clearly argue that Europe is a leader, at least in these areas, and will have a big influence all over the place.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I hadn't thought about the size of Europe acting or the size of the European market kind of acting as one of those forces to shape the AI development in the past.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's 450 million people in the EU. If you take Europe as a whole, it's, I believe, 700 million. That's twice the size of Europe, of the
America.
US. I mean, that we often I think we're not as good as the Americans of going out there and presenting our stuff, right? I think the Americans are typically better at that.
Yes, definitely.
But if you think about things a little bit more deeply, then there's a lot of stuff that we can do, and we should be, to some degree, should be proud of that, and we should be self-confident that, right, we don't have to wait until Google does all the stuff and then we just use it. I think that's really the wrong thing. And also this idea of, right, these new technologies being controlled by some private entities is also something that is being viewed here in Europe as something that is at least dangerous, and we should that should be looked into, right? And that's why this is also, like, here we see this really as a public good as well. That's why a lot of public money is flowing into that. Could be much more though.
Right. Great. Well, thanks for that. Well, why don't we move on to what the role of the German Research Center for AI actually does? So you mentioned a couple times before kind of these more applied uses of AI, and I think that might have some role with kind of the living labs that DFKI deals with. Maybe you can just discuss DFKI for those listeners that haven't heard of it before.
Yes, so DFKI stands for the German Research Center for Artificial Intelligence. DFKI is actually fairly old, founded in 1988 already, so 33 years old by now, which is really old. We've been the only AI research institute besides the professorships at various universities, and we're still the largest independent research center worldwide in AI. We're a private organization, a research organization. Shareholders are the states, the German states where we're located, as well as companies. So Microsoft is a shareholder, Intel, SAP, Google, but also agricultural companies, automotive companies, and they don't get money from that as shareholders because we're a nonprofit organization. But they become shareholders because they're interested in what we're doing. They want to interact with us. At every point in time, we're doing between 350, 400 projects, most of them in collaboration with industry, either on a one-to-one basis with a company or very directly. In many cases, these are joint research, collaborative research projects, where there's a couple of research institutes and university professor chairs and companies, small companies, big companies. So yeah, and our focus is really on applied research. Essentially, you can think of that, we're not doing research just because no one has done it yet. We always have a purpose, and we have a goal in mind of developing a technology that's not available yet and making this available to the industry. We don't do the exploitation at the end, but we leave that to, let's say, spin-off companies. There's quite a number of spin-off companies that DFKI generates, or our shareholders or the other industry partners that we're collaborating with. And then on the sometimes, or actually increasingly more, we are going into fundamental research, but we call this the application-inspired fundamental research. So we have an application in mind. We just see that the basis is missing, and so we have to go back and actually kind of build the basis on which we can then build the applications.
Maybe you could give sorry, maybe you could give an example of some of these applications, if they're not, if you can share them, just to give the listeners a little bit more of a kind of a tangible picture of what is actually being done.
Yeah, so one example from my own, older example from my own research area, which is called agents and simulated realism. Agents, so in the sense of AI agents. So we've built an agent-based control system for a steel mill. This is actually not far from here. This is operating the entire steel production at that site, and has been doing that 24/7 for, I think it's over 12 years now.
Wow. Okay.
So it's really hands-on, heavy industry applications. The way that worked was, it was actually a basic research project in the beginning, where we just used the use case in the steel production as an example of we wanted to aspire to be able to do that. And it just turned out to work well. And there were follow-up projects actually in the process, went over multiple years. In the process, multiple of the researchers actually joined the company. And eventually, right, we had something that we thought could work. We used their data to validate that it actually works. And at some point, we just switched it on at their site, and it's been operating since. And it's being actually, we're not involved with this anymore. It's actually the people in the company, that some of them come from us originally, that are still maintaining this. But we're doing big projects now, for instance, with the European Space Agency. Right, they have huge amounts of data. They operate a lot of the Earth observation satellites that circle our Earth and recording a lot of stuff. Lots and lots of applications there. We work with, I mentioned the agriculture companies, Claas, a German company, but also John Deere and others. That's actually a really interesting area. Right, digitizing, precision farming. There's very applied stuff, but they also pose very specific and very interesting research questions, right? We're mostly in for the research to kind of develop the technology that then allows the companies to benefit from there. And there's many other things. There's autonomous driving, of course, a big topic here in Germany, of course, but also the energy sector, right? The renewable energy revolution that has to happen, right? If we want to stop global warming, that has to happen. It's unimaginable to have that without AI, right? We need to control, if the level of renewable energy, that has to be, the production has to be matched to the consumption. There's a lot of large data control problems there. And so DFKI actually has, what is it now, 20 research areas. So each one is specialized in certain topics. We work rather independently on various projects, but we have also cross-cutting things on deep learning, on autonomous driving, because autonomous driving really needs a lot of different AI technologies from different areas to work together. And that's something that DFKI, I think, is uniquely positioned, because we have all these different elements. It's 1,100 people working at DFKI.
That's not a small little organization.
No, it's fairly large by now, and we're growing. I don't want to say exponential growth, but the growth is increasing. So it's actually moving fairly quickly, and there's a lot of interest, of course, in AI right now.
One of the things, and I think I mentioned this before, the living labs, I was quite interested to read that on the website. So of course you have all these kind of different focus areas for the organization, but then you also have these living labs, which, if I understood correctly, they're kind of environmental setups where you're actually able to test some of the research outcomes in I guess you could say, a mock environment of where the eventual client would use that. Could you touch on that just for a minute? Because I thought that was quite interesting.
Absolutely. That is something that is not unique, but I think DFKI is doing. It's a key part of what we're doing as DFKI. That we're not just doing the research and then we publish a paper or transfer a piece of software to a company. A key part of our mission as the biggest research institute in Germany and Europe is also to communicate both to the public, but also to industry, right? So a good example, for instance, is the smart factory. So you might know Industry 4.0, this revolution that was actually started from DFKI. Wolfgang Walster, our ex-CEO, is the key person behind this this idea of a fourth industrial revolution, to a large degree powered by AI. And that was a worldwide, it happened, right? Even in the US, it's spelled, industry is spelled with IE instead of Y, at least in many cases. And so the Smart Factory is an organization where it's actually a lab at DFKI in our Kaiserslautern lab, where we work with industry. It's kind of an exhibition in some sense. It's a lab where you can visit, you can see the thing in operation, and you can experience it. They do seminars, they invite people. Actually, a lot of the lab actually they have an entire production line, but it's a modular production line, where they have different stations, but they can be, and you can roll them on and off, and they're modular. They connect to each other, so you can reconfigure the whole system. But each of the modules is actually being produced and designed with some of those industry partners. So it's actually also a center for the industry to come together to try these out, but also get engaged and show that their technology actually does implement a lot of AI and can integrate and work well with the technology from the other companies. And I forgot how many companies are members there, and even more are visiting this every year. I mean, this is a little bit difficult right now. I mean, that's the problem with living labs, demonstration centers during the pandemic. That obviously works not as well, but we'll come back to that.
Might have to digitize them or make them available over VR over the next couple of years.
That's actually what we did. There was Hannover Messe this year, which is a big event for us. And particularly the Smart Factory lab, the Smart Factory was there and demonstrated a lot of that virtually. But it would be nice to be able to do this again in person, because particularly for production, right? You want to see that happening in front of you. That is a huge, very, very different experience than just seeing it on the screen.
Couldn't
other things are, we have a big retail lab that's actually it's a small supermarket, and that's actually located at a big supermarket's headquarter here in Germany. We do smart living, various other big robotics exploration laboratory, where we have halls actually for underwater robotics. It's a huge swimming pool where you can actually, industry comes in to test their system in our labs. And we have another hall which is for space robotics. You can essentially try robots on Mars, of course not in the same environment, but it's similar. So there's a lot of really interesting, it's this engagement with the community, but also with the general public and the industry that sets us apart there, I think.
Okay. Yeah, and I think that's also one of the things that might set Europe apart from, say, the United States, right? There's a really big focus on collaboration between industry players, between research institutes, as compared to the United States.
Yes, there is, but actually that's one of the areas where I can see a lot of improvement, and we're moving in that direction. I mean, I was at Stanford. I was a visiting assistant professor at Stanford for a while, so I experienced Silicon Valley firsthand, at least from the university side of things. But I was a visiting professor at NVIDIA for half a year as well. So that was also in Silicon Valley. That was my industry perspective, and what you see there. And what I think it's probably also somewhat unique to Silicon Valley, but it's this very early and close engagement between industry and research. They engage very early. The industry funds research very early, and it takes risk in doing so, right? Because that research might not work out at the end. And in Europe, for a long time, that was very different. Essentially, research was publicly funded. A PhD did his work for 2-3 years, and when the research was done, that is when industry got interested. We did a project for 3 months or 6 months, sometimes longer, but that was rather rare, to transfer that result, and then often they left, right?
Right.
In an area of AI like it is today, right? Google has implemented this thing 3 times over before the company even starts here in Europe. And so one of the things we actually started here at DFKI is this idea of a transfer lab where actually industry comes in and we collaborate on a long-term basis. And as part of that, they're actually willing to fund basic research. Because they want to engage, they want to have those results as early as possible, adapt their production processes or whatever it is into their how they operate.
Yeah.
And want to take advantage of these results as early as possible because they see this as a competitive advantage. And we have a dozen or more of them. It's not pervasive yet. It's still not all companies are ready for that yet, but this close collaboration that people are coming in actually work with us in the same lab, at least, well, after the pandemic, I guess we'll have that again. So that's different. But we're getting there, or at least to some degree. It could be faster.
Yeah. Of course.
There are differences. I would say companies are more risk aware here, and that's also maybe if you allow for talking a little bit about there's a change or a difference in how AI is being used here in Europe.
Yeah, for sure, that'd be great.
Here, AI is probably. I mean, of course, we also have pure AI startups and you know, right, big AI. Purely AI focused companies, but in Europe, I think there is a much stronger focus on using AI or injecting AI technology into existing companies and industries, right? So essentially strengthening and the existing companies, giving them a competitive edge by seeing how could AI change their production processes, their products, the way they operate, and things like that. I think there's a much bigger focus on that than maybe in other countries or other areas.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's very interesting. And I also think it kind of flows into the other question that I have. So, I mean, you were talking about all the different kind of focus areas that DFKI has. I think this is really like one of the questions that I'm asked a lot as I try to follow, AI development as much as possible. Many people seem to think that AI is just going to be, kind of gobbling up everything. It's going to be impacting everything. It's going to be disrupting kind of all aspects of society. With the research that you're involved in, are there any, say, key sectors or industries that aren't going to be disrupted by AI? I think we always hear about those that will be, right? Autonomous vehicles, mobility, manufacturing, et cetera. But are there any that, aren't going to be heavily impacted?
Probably not. No, I mean, if you think about that, what is AI doing, right? It allows us to essentially automate cognitive processes.
Exactly.
At least that is the goal. And we can, I mean, again, we can do great things with AI, but I mean, compared to human intelligence, there's a long way to go, right? And actually, I mean, since I'm at that topic, right, let me just say, to your listeners, right? I mean, there is the AI you see in Hollywood movies, right? Sure. Terminator and you name them, iRobot, and that is strongly influencing the public perception of AI, even though, right, we're far away, right? If anyone would be able to do just small parts of what is in those movies, you would get the Nobel Prize, even though there is none for AI. But anyway, the Turing Award or whatever. On the other hand, people largely underestimate the capabilities of AI in certain areas, right? I mean, obviously, we're better than humans on playing chess and Go and many others. But the main difference is we're very good at small, isolated topics, while that's artificial intelligence. Human intelligence is this really wide range of intelligence, and we're far away from that. That's certainly, we're nowhere near that in any way. And so there is, and so as we can automate more and more of these cognitive processes, of course that can be used everywhere, right? I mean, simple things like face detection, things, right? I mean, people argue a lot about that this is a dangerous technology, and yes, it can be dangerous if you apply that in the wrong context, but it can be extremely useful for many applications, right? We're using essentially similar technologies to detect skin cancer or I don't know, all sorts of other things.
COVID that was being done in China, I remember reading. Yeah, they're using AI to, I think, detect COVID in the lungs of patients, some 10 times faster than the actual test that they were using in the early days of COVID.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of stuff there. So yes, it will impact probably all areas of our life in some degree or another. However, it will not happen as fast as sometimes people draw dramatic pictures, right? I mean, people argued that, right, taxi drivers will be out of a job. I mean, we're far away from that. And even if we have autonomous driving at some point, you won't replace so many taxi drivers overnight, right? Precisely. So it will be much slower. I'm convinced it will be much slower than a lot of people fear. But yeah, there will be changes, and there will be certain jobs that probably we won't have many more. But there will be a lot of new jobs. Now, how that balance will look like at the end, that's really hard. And economists, I'm certainly not an expert there, argue one way or another. So it's very hard to say. But on the other hand, I think a human imagination, we always will want to do something, right? I mean, and we will find other ways of creating value to other humans, which essentially is what work is, right? Being valuable to other people. And I mean, if you think about this, right, 150 years ago, I forgot what the exact numbers is, but 80% of all jobs were in agriculture.
Yeah, precisely.
Right, farming. That's less than 5% now, or whatever.
I think it's less than 2%. Yeah,
or less than 2%. Whatever. I'm bad at these random numbers. So of course that was 150 years. For AI, that won't take 150 years. So that certainly is a difference. But I think there's certainly concern there, and we need to, also politicians, we need to manage that process, right? I think that's really the message, is we need to be prepared to manage that process. And there will be problems, right? Certain individuals might actually be out of a job and not be able to, and we need to find ways to handle that in a good way. And I see too little of that, really. I mean, there's a lot of fear, right? But then what can you actually do to prepare for that? That's a different story. And that's what we need to focus on. We need to do more in this direction.
Yeah, well, that's good to hear. That's actually one of the goals of the podcast, right? So it's not just talking about the automation and the disruption of jobs all the time, but I've had a couple of guests on talking about the new industries that are being generated and all of the jobs that are connected to that. I do want to go back to maybe this is connected to some of the research that's being done. Do you see like a specific type of job, or maybe even specific skills that are being automated more than others with AI? And again, I understand that this is still kind of early days, and over the next 50 years, this will change. But just from your point of view, do you see that already?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, funny enough, it is currently it's more the case that the the high-paid jobs are actually more in danger than the manufacturing, I mean, hands-on manufacturing, because robotics is making good progress, but this fine motoric handling of things, actually, I mean, car industry is actually de-installed robots because it turned out that humans are much better at that and faster and more accurate and make less errors than the robots did. Yeah, it seems to be that some of these kind of works are actually much harder to conquer for AI than, let's say, finding information like in legal analysts thing, right? I mean, what are you doing? You're searching through huge amounts of data. That's probably something that computers will do a much better job. But however, then actually making a decision at the end and based on that data, I think we're far away from really be able to fully automate that. But providing the right input for a decision, that's certainly, I mean, that's happening today in some areas already. And for the final decision, do we actually want to automate that? Like maybe that is something.
A good question.
In certain areas, probably yes. In other areas where, let's say, human lives depend on that, or human well-being depends on that, I think there is certainly should be a strong human oversight, right? There's various forms of how humans should still be involved in that. We don't want to be controlled by machines. And that's the other thing, maybe, right? I mean, a lot of people, and you probably heard of that, right? That a robot got citizen rights in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia,
Sophia, the Sophia, and it was a female-looking robot. Yeah, of course.
Right. I mean, human women don't have rights, as many rights there as a robot might have. I'm not actually sure about that, but it's kind of weird. A lot of people think of AI in that form, right? Replacing humans. That is certainly not what we're doing at DFKI. This is AI for humans, right? Human-centric AI, as we call it. It's supporting human in what we're doing, taking over some of the stuff that we're actually not good at. And we are in control, as I mentioned earlier. We're in control. We're building that technology. We are designing this, and we can also limit and where we want this to work and how we want this to work, right? And we should be much more aware of that. And this needs a lot of more discussion with the general public, right? That needs to understand where we are and what is possible, and eventually decide what we want as a society. That we can't, as researchers, I mean, certainly we probably have a voice in that, but we can't decide that for the public, right? That is something that the society as a whole has to decide. And that's something that I think needs to be much more present and needs to much more discussion in society to actually come up with that notion.
I couldn't agree further with you. I do see that the time is winding down here a little bit. Maybe as a kind of last question, and this is something I was holding back a little bit before. So you were saying that, of course, we now have these very specific AIs, the narrow AI, if you want to call it that, and the AI development is going to continue to grow until we get at some point some general artificial intelligence, which has the same kind of capabilities as humans. You were saying that it's probably going to take some time to do that. Do I dare ask you about a prediction, a timeline as to how?
I won't. No, I mean, predictions are difficult, in particular if it refers to the future, as someone said. No, I won't name any, and it will be gradual, right? It will be faster in some areas and slower in others, but we're certainly far away from really being able to do the whole breadth of human intelligence. We completely underestimate how good we are as humans. Let me just say this here loud, right? Yes. On the other hand, I'm I really don't like this notion of weak AI and strong AI, which is rather similar to what you just said.
Yeah.
I don't like those terms too much, right? I mean, for me, AI always should be a tool, right? It's a tool. It's just another tool. I mean, we have, I don't know, accounting systems. We have spreadsheets, right, and word processing and printing. What you have. In some sense, AI is a very powerful, but just another tool, right? Or actually a set of tools, a very wide set of tools, and we need to learn of how to apply that. And right, you can maybe at some point we could be in a situation where we build an artificial humans. I wouldn't know good reason for wanting to do that, right?
Right.
But a lot of human capabilities, recognizing what a human that, let's say, an AI or system is interacting with, recognizing that person, recognizing what he wants from me, recognize, right? I mean, just the kind of interaction that we're having, that would be extremely useful in many cases, right? But that doesn't mean we are building an artificial human.
Right.
It's just, it is maybe a form of interaction, right? Having said that, we also need to be careful here, because it also needs to be clear that this is not a human, right? Like, and that's actually in the EU regulation. It is that it must always be clear that you are interacting with a machine, right? It is not a human you're interacting with.
Yeah.
That and that can be difficult for humans, because we're very much into anthropomorphic, what's the word?
Anthropomorphizing. Yeah, I think.
Yes, that. Thank you. We do this very easily, and so I think that's an important part to really understand that this is not an intelligent human. This is a machine. It has limitations, and we should not, right? We should not mix up a human with even an intelligent machine. There are fundamental differences, and there should always be fundamental differences between the two.
I think that's a great way to end this discussion. Anyways, for the next couple of decades, we'll be safe in your point of view, and we won't have the Terminator and Skynet type of organizations or sci-fi nonsense take us over. Philipp, thank you very much for coming on. I will, of course, have the DFKI website and the Claire initiative that you mentioned up in the show notes. Are there other ways that you want people to get a hold of you, to follow your work, that I can place into the show notes for you?
Well, my LinkedIn page is easy to find. There are not too many Slusalleks around. Actually, I need to be careful here, because my son is getting into computer science. He's publishing his first paper in a couple of weeks. So it might get more difficult, but so far, Philipp Slusallek, type that into Google or your favorite search engine, and you'll find me on LinkedIn or my email address.
Perfect. Well, can't thank you enough for coming on. Thank you very much for sharing, I think, a really nice, concise idea of, anyways, applied artificial intelligence and some of those differences between the different countries and regions in the world. I thought that was really interesting. So thanks very much for coming on and sharing that.
Thank you for having me.
Great. Well, that's it for this week's episode. Thanks for listening. If you like what you hear and you want to support the podcast and the conversations here, the best way to do this is to go onto Apple Podcasts and leave a review, as it helps the algorithm to reach out to new listeners and brings the show to them. Also, feel free to check out the website, automatedpodcast.org, where you can find the show notes for each episode, written articles on the themes of the podcast, and a library of resources on the topic of emerging tech and automation. Also, if you want to reach out and leave any feedback, or you have any questions about the podcast or any of the conversations, there are general contact links such as email, LinkedIn, Twitter, etc. for you there on the website. And finally, for those of you that want more than just an audio conversation, the video recordings are now going to be up on YouTube for the newer conversations, so feel free to check out the videos by searching for Automated Podcast on YouTube, where of course you can like and subscribe if you prefer to support the podcast that way.
The Automated Podcast.